the question function or via the Facebook live stream on the MCV Facebook page. We will first hear from our panelists today, and once that's done, we'll take questions from the audience. Second, I think we have to acknowledge what's going on in Ukraine and how that impacts the conversation today. We're all obviously very troubled by what's happening there, and also see it as another reason why we need to move off our dependence on fossil fuels and transition to a sustainable, renewable energy future. So let me begin by way of introduction, first with Missoula City Council member Jordan Hess. Jordan is in his third term on the City Council in Missoula. He's been a tireless advocate for responsible land use and transportation decisions on the council. He has been a champion of the city's zero waste and clean energy goals, expanding Missoula's open space network and providing diverse transportation options. This term, he is focused on modernizing Missoula's zoning code, continuing to implement the city's new housing policy, and achieving the city's goals to transition to 100% clean energy for municipal operations. In his day job, Jordan directs the Office of Transportation at the University of Montana, where in 2016, he helped bring electric buses to Missoula, and a move which was a move that Mountain Line followed in 2019. Thanks for joining us, Jordan. Next is Kate French. Kate is the Rocky Mountain Field Organizer with the BlueGreen Alliance. The BlueGreen Alliance brings together labor unions and environmental organizations to advocate for a more resilient and just future. Kate's work and research on the economic impacts and job creation potential of coal ash pond closure, coal mine remediation, and community resilience have been widely cited and utilized by coal field and rural communities across the country. And last but not least, we have Jamison Lee. Jamison is an industrial automation technical sales representative out of Winn-Marion's Billings office. His territory coverage includes Montana and Wyoming. For over 2 years, the focus of his role has been electric vehicle supply, equipment distribution, and turnkey service. We'd also like to take a moment to congratulate Jamison, as he is a brand new father. And many of us who've been through that experience can tell you, it is a lot to step away for an hour to participate in this event. So thank you very much, Jamison, for making the time. I will kick this off by asking a few questions to our panelists. And the first one is for Jordan, who, as I mentioned, is wearing two hats today. And the first one that I'd like you to put on has to do with your work at the University of Montana's Transportation Department. A lot of folks may know that UM has a fleet of battery electric buses. Jordan, can you give us a little background on how this came to be, and once the decision was made to go forward with that, how long did it take you to follow through?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for hosting this today. It's great to be here, and love the work MCV does, and so I'm really happy to participate. As you mentioned, Chris, I'm the Director of Transportation at the University of Montana, and our transportation office is actually structured in a really unique way. We report up through the student government, and we're one of only 3 student-run transit systems in the United States. And this puts us really close to student advocacy and really close to student entrepreneurship and energy and creativity. And I think that the students get a ton of credit for our decision to electric in 2016. We began researching, and actually that also informed sort of our earlier history, that as a student-run organization, we are, my student board of directors and our elected student leadership are extremely interested in responsibly using student fee money. And so in our early years, our organization was purchasing used diesel buses from other organizations that were functionally beyond their useful life, and they were affordable, but they were noisy. They didn't have modern diesel emissions controls, and really around 2010 or 2012, we pivoted and we said we've got to start buying we've got to start leading on energy. We have climate commitments at the University of Montana, and we have an obligation to our student body and to our airshed to move in a different direction. So we started looking at compressed natural gas and diesel electric hybrids, around 2014, we were preparing to phase out an older diesel bus, and we just made the decision to go all in on battery electric buses. We started doing research, conducting due diligence, and really looking into the vendors that were available at the time. We received some financing through the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act that was administered by the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, and that, along with some state revolving loan funds, brought us to the point where we could financially afford to move forward. We bought two 40-foot battery electric buses in 2016, and we were the first university in the United States to purchase a modern fast charging battery electric bus. We spent a few months testing and got those buses deployed in January of 2017. And since that time, we've gone from an annual diesel fuel consumption of around 29,000 gallons of diesel fuel per year down to about 8,000 gallons right now. So we've significantly cut our reliance on diesel fuel. One of the things that's really positive about that right now in particular is that the cost of electricity is relatively stable. And so we're able to operate in a manner that saves costs, that's predictable, that is good for our airshed here in Missoula, and that is not exacerbating geopolitical tensions. So it's those were our first electric buses. Last year, we received 3 more electric buses, bringing our total fleet size up to 5. We'll add a 6th here later this year. So within a year, we'll have 100% electric buses in daily operation, and we'll just have a couple of diesel buses for charter service or for backups in case of mechanical failures or that kind of thing. It's been really exciting to see others follow suit. Mountain Line here in Missoula, our local transit provider, has become a national leader in fleet electrification as well. They have now 12 electric buses. They have 3 different makes and models of electric buses. So they've got some great on the ground knowledge of how those different models work in cold climates under different charging environments. But the one thing I can truly say is that this has become, this was a science fair project in 2014 when we first started looking into it, and it has become truly mainstream in transit. Electrification of transit buses, it makes sense financially, it makes sense environmentally, it truly is now it's no longer the future. It's now. It makes sense now, and it makes sense moving forward.
Do you think that other universities will follow suit, or other municipalities? I mean, have you been in conversations with some of them to provide a little instruction to things? And I guess how do you see this maybe spreading throughout the rest of the state?
Well, I think the rest of the state, Missoula has really robust transit offerings for a rural state. Mountain Line and the university both provide high frequency fare-free transit, and really, being the second largest urban area in the state, and being and having a real commitment to changing our mode split and reducing the number of people who drive alone to work and school. That has really positioned Missoula to expand transit in a way that's pretty unique within the state of Montana. Over the years, I've had a number of conversations with universities around the country, as universities across the country look to electrify their fleets. And I know Mountain Line's had in a real similar position where they've had conversations with similarly sized transit agencies across the country. I do know that there's interest in some of the other larger communities that operate similar sizes of vehicles and that kind of thing. One of the biggest issues is the upfront capital. So an electric bus costs roughly double what a diesel bus costs on the front end. our experience has been that the operating costs are significantly lower. And so over the life of the vehicle, it all comes out in the wash. And actually the electric vehicles are cheaper over the long run. But for smaller agencies, that access to capital really is going to depend on robust federal investment. And so, you know, the infrastructure bill has a lot of provisions for transit. There's a new bus and bus facilities grant opportunity out from the Federal Transit Administration that's open right now. I think that's what's really exciting for these, you know, for other agencies throughout the state is being able to access and leverage these federal funds.
And that's a great point about those federal funds. There's certainly been a number of proposals in Congress that would go a long way towards meeting some of those deficits of capital you described, and we'll get into that more in a little bit. Jamison, I'd also like to ask you how you know, if you could tell us a little bit more about your work and how you see the demand for EV charging stations starting to spread across the state. I mean, we're all very accustomed to putting in a little windshield time and coming across gas stations, but a lot of those gas stations that are popping up increasingly have EV stations. And so how do you see those proliferating throughout Montana?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's a privilege to be here today. Thank you all for your company. So from my own travel and network across the state in the last 2 years, I predominantly cover, you know, Western Montana and a good chunk of northern Wyoming, which are, you know, very, very rural and vast. And the demand that I've seen is mostly for corridor charging, you know, high speed charging, because the existing base is mostly Tesla superchargers. And that's what the, you know, the latest deployment by the Montana DEQ will address that. And I'm sure we'll get to it at a later time in this webinar here, but most of them are Tesla superchargers, which is a proprietary network. As more EV models are released and available to the public, not only by delivery, but by dealership availability, that demand is only going to rise exponentially with electric vehicles being on the road. And just to throw some statistics out there, you know, or numbers straight from Atlas EV Hub, if anybody's taken notes, it has all of the vehicle registrations for many of the states in the nation as to, you know, battery electric vehicles or BEVs or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, PHEVs. But in total, you know, in 2021, January, there were about 1,800 electric cars registered in the state. And that's including hybrids and full battery electric. In January of 2022, we're right around 3,000 registrations. And that's without having much of a dealership presence and a lack thereof of available electric models for consumers to buy. But with, you know, half-ton electric trucks coming out and a lot of the models that Montanans drive, and specifically rural Montanans drive and will rely on for their corridor and commuting traffic, sometimes upwards of 150 miles a day for a commute, it's only going to grow. And yeah, so specifically corridor charging and workplace charging are going to be huge demands in the state, and locals would say the same.
Well, we have a hybrid electric in our family, and we're happy to contribute to the demand and glad to see them spreading around the state a lot more. I'm wondering too how you see this compares to Wyoming and maybe colleagues that you have who work in other states too. I mean, how does Montana stack up? Are we doing well? Could we do a little better?
So Montana, you know, in comparison to our border states, has done very well. And I will speak to states that Winn-Marion has a lot of involvement in, being, you know, in the Rocky Mountain region. So Montana, North Dakota, you know, all the way down through Texas. But our largest involvement has been in Montana and in Colorado up to this point in time. Montana has been very progressive and forward-thinking in the deployment of EV infrastructure in comparison to some of our border states, you know, namely North Dakota, Wyoming. You know, for comparison, there aren't even electric vehicle registration data right now for us to look at for the state of Wyoming, and there really isn't a charger build out yet. But I do know that the DOT, you know, is working hard and steadfast on it, and namely North Dakota has as well. And I do want to you know, give a lot of that credit for Montana to the DEQ. You know, Neil Ullman and Kyla Mackey have been wonderful, you know, working hard on spreading information and making that funding available, and as well as Alicia Cox with Yellowstone Teton Clean cities. All of them are phenomenal resources to connect you with and even consult with for grant opportunities and in deployment. But yeah, Montana has been very progressive in comparison to our border states, to keep it short.
That's great to hear. Kate, we'd like to turn to you now. If you could tell us a little bit about some of the work that you do with Blue-Green Alliance and initiate the uninitiated to it. I know, many of us who worked on these issues for a long time in Montana know how important it is for workers and conservationists to come together around these issues to get things done. And could you tell us a little about what you're doing in that respect?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everybody. So the Blue-Green Alliance is a national organization that brings together labor unions and some of our country's largest environmental organizations to really tackle some of the biggest challenges of our time. And one of those primary challenges is, how do we create a new clean energy economy that is really, really good for workers, for families, and communities. And so we have, like I said, a national part of our work that works on federal policy. And we also have state tables in about 12 states. One of those is Colorado. We also have them in Washington, Oregon, and California. So those are our closest neighbors to Montana. Here, we don't have a table in Montana, but we do have me here, and I work with groups like Montana Conservation Voters, but also our labor unions in the state to advocate specifically on federal policies for right now. And I've lived in Montana for quite a while, and this is a fun and very challenging extension of the work I've been doing here with both of those types of entities. I would say Blue-Green Alliance is really predicated on the idea that there's a lot of false dichotomies out there. You either create clean energy or fossil-free energy system, or you have good jobs, but you can't have both. And that's really a false dichotomy. I've worked a lot with coal workers and unions in coal communities where a lot of people really do believe in eventually a carbon-free, economy, but it's just how we get there and how we move there. And so by bringing all these people together, we wind up really pursuing some really creative solutions, I think, and stuff that, moves everybody, a tide that rises all boats. So that's really what we work on. I'll stop there.
Yeah, a really salient example of that in Montana, I think, is obviously Colstrip, where, which has had historically, I think, IBEW workers and other organized labor groups representing folks there. What do you think are some good example of cases where organized labor is starting to gain a share of the renewable energy economy, and examples that you would choose to hold up?
Yeah, well, I think something really specific, just thinking about electric vehicles, one of the more interesting things to think about is, like, how are we building up the workforce of the future? So apprenticeship programs and training programs. And so for electric vehicles, there's a really great electric vehicle infrastructure training program that helps folks who are already journeyman electricians get the skills and that knowledge, that just one extra layer of knowledge to install what are really, really intense charging stations. This isn't just somebody like me who can change a light bulb. This is really high skill work. So making sure that we are giving our Montana workers here the chance to do that work, to install electric vehicle charging stations all over the state. So that's one opportunity I would really lift up. I would also say one thing that we are also engaged on, and it's more of it's a collection of it's a group of unions who have come together regarding the Clearwater wind farm that's being built over in eastern Montana. Now that is right in Colstrip's backyard, and it is 750 megawatts. When it's all when it will all be built, that energy is being sent to Washington because they are going they're going fossil free by 2025. But right now the work is not being done by union labor. And so what happens then, so it's not a very safe working environment typically when you don't have unions involved. We don't know if those jobs are being paid well or if people are being protected. And so right now folks are in that community are really fighting to say those really should go to Montana workers. That's the other thing. It looks like it's going to folks from like North Dakota, Texas, everywhere else. But really, it should be the folks in that community who have the skills to do those jobs. And a great example of that would be the operating engineers who have been, they represent the miners over at the Rosebud mine, and they're looking at their next opportunity. And there's a really great op-ed that they had submitted in late December. You can find that in the Billings Gazette, where they're saying, we have the skills to put up those wind towers. And so really supporting that work, I think, is something everybody can get behind. And I can put that in the chat. And then, of course, we are really working together to make sure that the money allocated from the infrastructure law is allocated in such a way that it really prioritizes skilled Montana union workers, and that when Build Back Better or budget reconciliation, whatever we're calling it next, really does again benefit our skilled local workforce.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember during the Bakken oil boom, how many people in Montana went to North Dakota to work on those jobs. It would be great if we were creating and sustaining so many jobs in renewable energy here that we became the same sort of magnet for opportunity in that domain. Jordan, I'd like to turn back to you a little bit now with your Missoula City Council hat on, and ask you how the council is addressing both the demand for clean energy in the community and a longer term goal to end our dependence on fossil fuels.
Sure. And I should have orchestrated a wardrobe change, I guess, for role change. But so back in the early 2010s, I guess the city passed the city's conservation and climate action plan. And that, like a lot of early climate action plans, had a lot around municipal operations and specific zero emission targets for just for city operations. About 3 years ago, I think it was early April 2019, the city of Missoula and Missoula County passed a 100% clean electricity resolution, and that resolution had community-wide targets of 80% clean electricity by 2025 and 100% by 2030, which we recognized at the time was an ambitious target, but everyone on this call knows the importance of being ambitious and being bold and making ambitious targets, and not only making those targets, but achieving those targets. We, since that time, have been working with Northwestern Energy, with our monopoly regulated utility here in the state. We've made a really good faith effort to work with the utility to see how much, if anything, we can accomplish working together with them. The biggest thing to come out of that is the so-called green tariff or renewable rate option discussion, and those discussions are ongoing. It's been encouraging to see Northwestern put out their zero emission 2050 goal. We certainly push them in that direction at the city of Missoula. Frankly, it's not fast enough, it's non-binding, and the real proof is going to be in what actual actions come out of that. And what encourages me is that renewables around Montana and across the country are demonstrating over and over again that they win on cost and that they win on reliability. And these are factors that we need to just continue bringing up in these discussions around clean energy as a municipality. So this is. I also want to say that the city and county are sophisticated players in this field. We're working on this renewable rate option, but we're also tracking really closely what's happening in Utah with House Bill 411 in Utah, and we're we've been watching in Boulder with the potential creation of a municipal utility in Boulder. And the city of Missoula just went through a costly, protracted effort to municipalize our water system, and we're really familiar with what it with just how complex municipal utilities are, and so it's sort of a multi-pronged approach, but council, the city council in Missoula and councils across the state allocate resources and set policy, and we continue to allocate money and direct staff to work on this and continue to reach for that ambitious policy goal.
Cities can do so much and local governments can do so much in terms of meeting the demands of climate change. I know here in Whitefish, the community has adopted a climate action plan. We see the effects of this up close and personal with melting glaciers and the impacts that will eventually have on our tourism economy. I was wondering if there are other communities in the state that you would call out as being particularly successful in this as well, besides
on the clean energy piece. Helena and Bozeman have both demonstrated leadership on this. Bozeman's at the table, really as partners with Missoula County in these discussions with Northwestern Energy. The Bozeman, the local governments that I referenced have hired an expert firm, Energy Solutions, based out of Utah, to help us navigate this as our technical expert. And these communities have contributed financially to the effort. And so I think when you start talking about Bozeman and Helena and Missoula and adding in Whitefish and adding in communities around the state, you end up with a really significant number of electricity consumers represented by that coalition. And so I think it's important that we look to broaden that, to other large communities, or communities across Montana, large and small, and utilize existing and possibly new statewide advocacy organizations to get people on the same page. I think really that group purchasing and political power is going to be what ultimately makes this change in Montana. And frankly, there's a lot of things that need to change at the legislative level. I mean, the community choice segregation, the different frameworks within that are working in other states are not enabled under Montana law. So we need to potentially come up with some legislative priorities, and that of course is going to have that of course takes a broad base of support as well.
Speaking of legislation and things that are going on at the state government level, I know a couple of folks have mentioned DEQ initiatives, which earlier this year came out with a plan to expand charging stations around the state. And I know, Jamison, this is kind of in your wheelhouse, and they're really targeting high traffic areas like around Glacier Park and Yellowstone National Park. Could you talk a little bit more, Jamison, about how you see this rolling out and whether there are any other similar programs coming to fruition?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a pretty hot topic right now. If anyone's familiar with the Volkswagen settlement, the state of Montana received about $12.6 million to allocate towards alternative fuels. Of that, there was money set aside for electric vehicle infrastructure, and the Montana DEQ has been the liaison and the proprietor of a lot of the campaigns and funding that has been released in about the last probably 3 years or so, since 2019. But the latest funding pool was focused primarily towards DC fast charging along western Montana corridors. So the largely not only densely populated areas of the state, but also the densely EV populated parts of the state. Approximately 75% of EV registrations in Montana are west Billings and headed west. But with this, there were 27 charging stations that were awarded. I believe it's 16 or 17 different sites throughout the state, from Libby all the way down to Dillon, and even in Yellowstone Park, at Gardner there, and up at Glacier as well. But a lot of these locations are Town Pump and Northwestern working together to provide 50 kilowatt and well, I'll keep terms out of it, but fast chargers, and in addition to level 2 chargers at these locations to at least get a foundation and basis of non-Tesla charging stations in the states, that all vehicle models coming out can have a place to charge, at least where the vehicles are currently, and in addition to Tesla will be able to use these charging stations as well, but unfortunately cannot say the other way around. All of these vehicles coming out will not be able to charge on the Tesla supercharger network currently. But predominantly it was I-15, I-90, a little bit of Highway 2 and Highway 93. And if you look, I would implore anyone on this call to look on either PlugShare or ChargeWay. There's several different driver apps out there that will lay out the entire map of the existing charging infrastructure in the states, and it is agnostic to network, so it will lay out every charger that's been published by an owner or by a network. But what we can be excited about moving forward too, in addition to these projects, is, you know, for the remainder of 2022 and into 2023, these installs will be happening throughout the western half of the state and hopefully be online. I do believe that already the Whitefish town pump location is going, as well as the Sealy Lake location is up and running as well through the Missoula Electric Cooperative, and as well as the Gardner Travel Plaza in Gardner, Montana. So they're already coming to fruition, and a lot of this is, you know, due to lead times and things of that nature that we're all familiar with at this time. What's coming though is a lot of money from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, particularly, you know, $5 billion allocated to just EV charging for the nation, but the state of Montana alone will receive about 43 million of this over a 5-year duration. And Montana's department, the MDT, or Department of Transportation, will be allocating and building a plan to disperse these funds later this year. Their deadline to get a plan together is August 1st, and then the Federal Highway Administration will be approving those plans end of September, and then the Department of Transportation, if the plans are approved, will be deploying these plans and making the funds available for, you know, for private businesses and utilities alike to really finish out and build out I-94 and the remainder of, you know, US Highway 2, and really start filling these rural gaps that we have in the state, which is very exciting that, you know, you will be able to feasibly drive throughout the state with an electric vehicle and not have to fear for running out of your tank of batteries, so to speak. But yeah, that's the bulk of what's coming, and also again, if anyone's taking notes, there is a new office. The Department of Transportation and Department of Energy have a new joint office, and there is a website formed with all of the information I'm telling you. If you'd like to go take a look for yourself and even look at all of the new bills, and it's almost daily that there's new information available. But driveelectric.gov is a phenomenal source for anyone interested in more info.
That's great. I just texted that to my wife, as a matter of fact, who drives a hybrid electric and is always on the lookout for chargers. And I'm very glad to have those new charging stations in Whitefish as well. You know, Kate, what Jamison just described is a lot of work. And there's no shortage right now that it's no secret right now that there is a big shortage of workers and skilled, well-qualified workers to do a lot of the jobs that our rapidly evolving economy is doing. I was wondering what are groups like BGA doing to help unions move to these clean energy jobs? And is there work with other states where the process, you think, might be moving faster?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, you know, at the federal level, but it's also work that we're engaging on here in Montana, various labor unions, is making sure that, especially the Build Back Better bill or the budget reconciliation bill, really retain some of the things that create good jobs in the next economy. I think this whole narrative about like there's worker shortages, yeah, in some ways, but I think it's that there's there's a shortage of high quality jobs, and that's what people are really looking for, right? Folks are really looking to put their skills to work and be fairly compensated, right? And have a benefits package that'll help them navigate what we don't have in society. We don't really have much of a social safety net, right? So your pension or healthcare benefits that are provided for your job are so critical. So I think that it's good to put that lens on as we consider that question. But some of the things that we're looking at in the budget reconciliation package, this climate and energy package, which by the way is not dead, okay? It is being revived, talks are being revived, but there are some really groundbreaking things in there that we think are just really critical to retain, and that's things like prevailing wage, so making sure we have family sustaining wages with all of these jobs. The other things are really interesting, like domestic content standards, especially if it's clean energy investments, that there are domestic content standards. So you say 100% of the iron or 100% of the steel is made in America. And by shoring up our domestic supply chains through other funding mechanisms in the bill, we can make sure that we have we can revitalize communities, manufacturing communities, especially in the Midwest. We can make our supply chains more reliable, and we can make sure that they are like the cleanest supply chains in the world. So those are some of the things that we are fighting for, but also identifying, I'd say something that Blue-Green Alliance is doing is helping to identify what workers and unions, their stake in the clean energy economy, and where are things moving, right? So we have, oh my gosh, we've got these huge investments coming for emissions reduction technologies. Okay, that means that these sorts of facilities might be being built. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that steel manufacturing is going to be ramping up. So we can really identify some of the emerging sectors and say, hey, like this is something to ready your workforce for. I would say the other thing is making sure that we are really supporting efforts to unionize like new electric vehicle manufacturing facilities. Within the Build Back Better bill, there was another tax credit there's a tax credit for I think it's like $5,000 if you buy a vehicle that was assembled in a union or in a facility with a bargaining agreement. Well, that's great because it helps us maintain those union facilities, but it also makes electric vehicles more affordable for working families. So I would say like these are some of the things that we're working on, and it's really thinking about that supply chain. It's not just a wind development or a solar development, which are great, and really what we need, but looking all up and down the supply chain and saying, are we manufacturing? Are we using supplies that are made in America? And are we helping every step in the process be as carbon or as climate friendly as possible and as worker friendly as possible, so we can be really proud of the entire system that we're building up.
Yeah, that's a really great point on the supply chain. And it's one of the things that Build Back Better, at least in its previous form, would have addressed is so many of these supply chain issues and bringing materials to companies that need to use them and create jobs to make them. We've all talked around the question of Build Back Better throughout this entire conversation. And while the bill in its previous form is obviously pretty well stalled, there remains a broad commitment amongst members of Congress to get something done on climate, and particularly if that means pulling things out of the bill that could be repackaged into a new form. I'd like to hear from each of you what you are seeing in your communities and how your communities are responding to some of these potential provisions, and if you've seen reactions to those change over the recent days and weeks and months in terms of some of the specific things that you thought were the most attractive in the legislation. Jordan, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm thinking about that from the standpoint of transit, and I think a lot of the things that Kate just talked about are really relevant in transit. We transit is a heavily unionized field, and it's a field with good paying career opportunities across the country, and I think that that's just extraordinarily important, and supporting supporting workforce development as we have maintenance technicians that are transitioning from maintaining diesel vehicles into battery electric vehicles, and there's so much kind of in that realm as far as workforce development and training, and ensuring that these are that there are good union opportunities. Contrast that with the university transit system, and we're our student employees anyway are non-union, but we really look to provide. We look at ourselves as training the next generation of transit professionals that feed into union positions at transit agencies around the country, and so I think that training and workforce development piece is big, and then of course just access to capital for making these big transitions. We're trying to make monumental changes in our economy, and we absolutely need federal and state assistance.
And I can chime in next on that, and on the EV charging front. With the Build Back Better proposition, it's as Kate had touched on, there will be additional incentives for American union-made vehicle purchases, particularly new electric vehicle purchases, and that will be bumped, from $7,500 per vehicle up to $12,500, back in tax incentives, which is huge. That, a big complaint of electric cars and even hybrids currently is how expensive they are. They're not economical. Who can afford them? Only the wealthy can afford them. And as time will tell, and as more large manufacturers release these models, it will slowly move that curve down, and this tax incentive will help with folks being able to afford these cars and try them out rather than dream of owning them. And moving from that, there's also a proposition, an aggressive goal of 500,000 charging sites in the nation, and with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're only touching 15% of that at potential, but it's estimated to be upwards of $50 billion to build out that network, and mind you, $5 billion is what was just put out there by the bipartisans. So we have a long way to go, and it's a very aggressive goal, but it's also very exciting for those that want to drive green vehicles and really feel the performance and do good with driving an electric vehicle. So very exciting what's ahead of us.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. I know I mentioned a few of our priorities and what we've been working on in the state, but just a few other things to flag is that there are a lot of provisions that would hire or prioritize hiring displaced coal workers. So we really want for new projects, especially clean energy projects. There's also some provisions that would incentivize locating new manufacturing facilities in coal communities. So we are really concentrating on making sure that these things that benefit the communities that are really kind of losing out, right now with the switch to a clean energy economy, that they are first in line. Additionally, making sure that a lot of projects are going to be located in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by pollution, or environmental justice communities. So I think that some of those provisions are just really top of mind. They're kind of scattered throughout the budget reconciliation package, but they're really, really critical to retain in there. I would also say that just kind of highlighting, sometimes I think when we talk about the new clean energy economy, we can really get excited about some of the individual choices we can make. Can we put solar panels on our own house, right? And sometimes it's good to take a step back and think, what are the more widely social changes we can be investing in, or projects we can be investing in? And from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and in Build Back Better, I really think some of the investments into rail and mass transit, that is really relevant for our state, and transmission infrastructure, hardening the grid, expanding the grid, really making sure that we can connect all these new renewable resources to all the users that will be out there. So really trying to highlight some of those investments. And then finally, just because you had mentioned, Chris, I kind of skipped over what other states are doing. And I'll just flag two things that I think are really worth mentioning. Colorado has a really landmark Office of Just Transition. It was the first one in the country. It's really worth looking into. Some very, very innovative, creative solutions to manage this transition and how workers and communities are being addressed and taken care of, and being brought in as stakeholders, early on, not just talked about like I am, like, oh, out there, let's do something for them, but bringing them in so we're hearing their voices. And then the other thing I would really highlight is the Illinois Clean Energy Law or Bill, Act, Clean Energy Act, that got passed in 2021. It is sweeping, it is huge, but it hits everything that you kind of wanted to hit, investing in communities that have been chronically underinvested in for decades, making sure we're hitting those EJ communities with investments and really making sure that every job that's created is a good, secure job in the new clean energy economy. So it's a very innovative, forward-thinking bill or law that I think would just be worth looking at. There are just some, and of course California as per usual, but I just wanted to highlight those two as other examples that I don't think get enough airtime.
That's a great point. It's a great example of where Montana could be headed and particularly on our own terms as we figure this out. I would like to remind folks in the audience to drop questions into the Q&A box. I see we've got a couple that have floated in here, but before we tick off some of those questions from the audience, I guess I'd just like to get the panel's general thoughts about where you see the Montana clean energy economy headed in the next 5 or 10 years.
I think one area that's really exciting to me in the clean transportation economy is all of the work around passenger rail, and the Montana Passenger Rail Authority, or the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, that was formed in the last year and a half and has really gotten traction with member counties throughout southern Montana, is working to restore passenger rail service that we last saw 42 years ago through southern Montana. And I think that's really exciting to me as an economic driver from a tourism standpoint and a business travel standpoint. You think about all of the high tech and other startups in Missoula and Bozeman, and there's such opportunities for business travel via passenger rail. But it also really addresses some of the core, transit and passenger rail, and these are great equalizers in our community. So you can have a tourist on a pleasure trip on a passenger train right next to someone who is using a rail because they don't have access to a vehicle and they need to access medical care. And this is really, I think, as we look at the cost of housing and just some of the real challenges that our state is facing right now, I think that the passenger rail and clean public transportation solutions are really an integral part of the solution. So that's where my passion lies and what I'm most excited about moving forward.
I can jump in. I think like 3 words come to mind for me, is that I would say diverse, local, and worker powered, kind of hyphenated, but I would say diverse because I really think that we are moving from, in many communities, places where the economic engine of the community is one industry, one employer, maybe 1 or 2, right? As we move into a clean energy economy, it's going to be many, many different industries, many different employers, right? Just how when we envision the electricity of the future, how is it being generated? Well, before it might have just been coal, natural gas. Now we're going to be moving into a much broader array of generation options and a big puzzle that has to be put together. So I really think diverse, I would say local, as much local workforce as we can hire, as many local solutions as we can implement, as many local businesses that we can help to support is going to really make it more sustainable and resilient. And then worker powered, that we make sure that the jobs that we're creating really support workers and that they are really a huge leading voice in how the rest of our state is run. And so, yeah, I think those are my 3 words.
Great. Jamison, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you both of you are covering a wide array of topics here, and it leaves real slim room to add to it. But yeah, I think us moving as a state towards clean transportation, in the light and heavy duty sectors will be a huge step forward for us. And the reality is that we will be reliant on natural gas combustion and for power generation for quite some time to come. It's still the major producer in our state, despite our impressive sustainable energy numbers. But in time, I think as renewable energy starts to be sustainable in itself financially, and that proves to be true, that it is monetizable, so to speak, and it does have a return of investment. I think it will be much more accepted by all parties in the state. I believe that we are headed that direction, and a little bit of a kickstart with subsidies and grants alike, but it will, in time, it will roll out, and Montana will be a national leader, at least in the top 5 list.
Great. It looks like we have time for just a couple questions here. The first is for Jordan. Given your analysis on replacing a bus with electric, do you think there is any vehicle in your fleet that shouldn't be replaced with electric?
That's a great question, and I really don't. I think one of the nice things about transit is that vehicles run predictable routes and predictable lengths of time, and our first generation buses were what we called a fast charge bus. So we actually have a charger on one of our routes near the University of Montana Music Building, and the bus pulls in, it semi-autonomously docks with the charger, and it charges during the time when passengers are getting on and off the bus. And so it could actually run 24/7, just docking at this charger every time it comes by. So we're kind of continually topping off the charge. The newer buses that we have are a more, kind of a plug-in overnight sort of model. And we do have, if it's 10 degrees and we're running the heat and we're going to have some range concerns. On a typical day, we'll be able to get through a full route with no problem. And these capacities are just, I kind of joke that our first buses from 2016, they already look like those giant cell phones from the 80s that were the size of a cinder block, where the technology has progressed so quickly that at this point I would have no anxiety whatsoever with replacing our entire fleet with probably every urban transit route in Montana with electric buses.
Great, thank you. And the next question, this might be something you'd be able to speak to too, Jordan, given your work with Northwest Energy. But does Northwest Energy have the capacity to supply a built-out charging network? And Jamison, you may be able to weigh in as well too on the follow-up question here, which is how many EVs can we have in Montana before Northwest Energy can no longer be able to supply them?
I'd probably defer to Jamison. I'm not that familiar with their ability to serve that, I guess.
Yeah, so I can speak to that, kind of on there's 2 different scales to that, right? There's an overall grid view, and then there's kind of a local local application view. And I wish I had the numbers for you. You know, I'm sure Northwestern has done some analysis on that as to, you know, what can we really handle? What is our limit before we need to build out or have more power gen? But I can say that, you know, with the proposed sites coming with the infrastructure law, you know, it's near a megawatt per site. If you had, you know, 4 vehicles charging at peak continuous output, that's substantial power. And beyond that, at a local level, you know, 480 volt 3-phase is what's required to reach that level of charge. And working with a lot of the electric cooperatives in the state, and not only just Northwestern Energy, there are places that we need chargers that do not have 483 phase to do that and to support that charge. So I think it's been handled more of at a local level and trying to get the chargers there. But I'm sure in time, as we hit whatever that threshold is of power generation, it will be available, and I'm sure it will be public information. But at this time, there doesn't seem to be much of a concern with these initial build outs. It's really just kicking off, and most of the population will be charging at night in their garage regardless. You know, and we're really talking corridor traffic and long distance traveling that will be using those fast chargers, which really seem to put a high draw on the grid during peak hours. So that's as much as I can speak to it without being out of pocket.
Great, thank you. And our final question comes from Senator Chris Pope, who asks and says, we seem to be moving as a state to a more reasonable approach to a clean and affordable grid, which will provide both opportunities and challenges to our state. Are there things we can be doing today to prepare for that future if it comes?
Yeah, I'll come in here and say that I think there's some really exciting conversation, or there's a lot of exciting movement when it comes especially to how the Western market is organized and administered right now. And there's a bigger push than it's been seen in decades to create potentially a regional transmission organization or a regional market and a grid that we can sustain. And that would really help us to balance out all this new clean energy generation with the demands, especially in big population centers. I think the really big key, of course, I'm always going to say it, is making sure that workers have a seat at the table and that we are really prioritizing the needs of local communities that haven't really gotten a lot of this work. And I think there's also an education component here. I think there's a lot of not in my backyard sort of concerns that get brought up when it, when we start looking at a much bigger grid or, bringing in more transmission lines, and a lot of those concerns are very, very valid. And then some things are being brought up by billionaires who, bought one property and they don't want to see, his solar panels, or wind farms, or, don't want there to be anything different about what they look at. But this is kind of a big project that we have to, that we all have to participate in together. And so I think that there's a lot of education about the benefits of what a more integrated, larger, and more well-organized grid would mean for our region, but also that we should be participating. So it's a complicated topic, though, to to be participating on, but it's important, and we have to start thinking of it as a really critical issue for our state and for our lawmakers.
That's great. Thank you, Kate. I know, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave a couple of questions on the table here in the interest of time, but I guess I'd just like to ask the panel if they have any closing comments they'd like to make before we wrap it up.
Well, I just would thank MCV for putting this together. It's great to be here, and I think we have tremendous opportunity, and we have out of challenges come opportunities to do great things, and I think that's what we're faced with. And climate crisis is the challenge of our generation, and we have no choice but to do these things that we're talking about today. So I look forward to working with all of you on them.
Yeah, I would just thank MCV for pulling this together and for them being such a leading voice in our state and bring just the whole state together to be creating a future that we all want to live in. So I just really appreciate being invited to speak and with these other great folks.
Yeah, thank you all. Yet again, it's a privilege to be on this panel with you. I just implore anyone that if you have questions or you're curious about how EV charging works, just EV 101 questions, anything, and you're hungry and want to learn without diving through pages and pages on the internet, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I will never shy away from having a conversation and spreading knowledge where I can and doing my part. I think my contact info will be available as well as the other panelists after this. And I will say that if anyone out there is curious about electric vehicles and has not driven one yet or not had the opportunity, please do. As soon as they hit a dealership, or if you can find a drive electric opportunity with Flathead Electric Cooperative or Electrify the Big Sky. There's several events that are starting to pop up in the post-COVID era here, where you can show up, and there are several different models where you can pick and choose and figure out what works for you and really feel what the future feels like. It's truly its own experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone.
I do too. I mean, the first time you go 2 months without filling your car with gas, you will really appreciate it. So, because we have a hybrid electric. Anyways, thanks everybody for joining us. Contact information is up. Really appreciate the contribution and the work, of course, that all of the panelists do. Thank you very much for what you're doing to transition our economy to a clean energy economy. Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.